So for drying conditions, temperature, humidity, what are the ideal dry conditions?
I think the traditional 60-60 that everybody's been using for forever, it works. It works. 5 points either way also works. Um, I think being able to go slower on the days it takes to fully remove a certain amount of water could is beneficial for terpene retention. Because the faster you're bringing that water out, the faster you potentially could be volatilizing your terpenes off too. So I think there's a nice medium point, which 60-60 it achieves well. I think that the time will come where we start to understand, again, how delicate these trichomes are. One thing that you get when you're using very traditional systems, let's say a mini split and a DHU, when you're looking at tracking over time, even though your set points might be 60-60, you've got these pieces of equipment fighting each other all the time. You've got the AC coming on, it's getting cooler, but then the humidity is also rising because the humidifier's off or the DHU's off, and then it switches places because then it's, then the DHU kicks on, but then that makes the room hot. So it's this constant cycle of on and off where you're also seeing these huge spikes up and down. And so I kind of like to think of it like a balloon. If you have a balloon filled with helium and you go outside and it's a humid day versus a not humid day, the balloon will float and it will expand and contract. And that's how I think of the trichome head, is expanding and contracting because of this environment. And at some point, the expanding and contracting will cause cracks. And these small cracks, how much terpenes, how's the loss? And so that's what I'm really interested in, is taking a step further than just saying humidity and temperature, and understanding the pressure that goes behind it, because all of that is wrapped around VPD, and really understanding the internal pressure of what's in that cell and the outside room pressure, and not causing those swings to be so intense.
So stability is kind of more important than the temperature and humidity in the grand scheme of things, because like I had mentioned, and a lot of these folks that are drying in tents, they're having just that happen. For me, I have my humidifier kick on, fans are going around. Sometimes I have exhaust fan come out, I'm exchanging the air, but there's a lot of swings happening, and it might be 1 or 2 degrees, but those 1 to 2 degrees could be rupturing trichome heads, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So overall, what would be the ideal length of dry in number of days? I've heard anywhere from 7 to 14 days. I hear 5 to 10 days. We know the downsides of drying too quickly versus trying too long, and maybe you can get into that to begin, and then let us know what the ideal dry time day is in.
Yeah, so I'd love to share with you, maybe you can squeeze into the talk. It's a graph we put out where it looks at days 1 to 14. It's looking at humidity and temperature, and correlates the VPD. And it shows, if you go out 14 days, it equates to this VPD, and so on. And so it shows kind of right in the middle there at 7 days. If you are at that 60-60 mark, you should be able to achieve it within 7 days. It's a really useful tool, but obviously you can go further than, let's say you're at 60-60 and you go 8 days. Well, each day you go past, you're bringing more and more water out of that flower, and you may think, okay, well, I can just rehydrate it at some point. But we're starting to see a lot of extreme rehydration can cause a lot of browning as well. And so being able to pull it right at the right time and having to dry it a little more is okay. But if you're having to really, really have to rehydrate it, you won't have quite as great results. So the goal is to get it right where you want it, right when you pull it from whatever drying environment you're in.
Now, what about a 4-day dry? So I have the Canatrol. I know you're familiar with the Canatrol. I've got one right back there. And I love it. I've been using it for over a year now. Real consistent dries, hands off as far as I'm not really messing around with the equipment now, humidifier and fan and all that stuff. But I think in their normal settings, 68 degrees Fahrenheit and a 54 dew point, which I believe is 61% RH, I think it's a 4-day dry period, and then it transitions over to curing cycle. And that's their default settings. That's what they recommend. Is 4 days too quick of a dry?
I don't think it's too quick. Again, we're working through all of these nitty gritty details with Canotrol. I think anywhere between that 4 and 10 day mark is okay. And again, but until we can say you truly need 5 days at a water activity of 0.8 to convert the starches to sugars, because that is what makes for the better smoke. It's hard to say there's much difference in 3 days, as long as you're not drying it out too much, which I know their product doesn't do. I also know their product doesn't have the extreme swings that the traditional equipment does. That's part of what their purpose is, to have extremely consistent pressure. VPD. So no, I don't think it's too short, and I don't think we'll be able to measure that until we kind of backtrack to what is a smooth smoke. All right, quantify that, and then backtrack from there to say, all right, well, 5 days would allow this process to fully develop to equate to the perfect smoke at the end. Sometimes I feel silly not having answers, but as a researcher, you're told, you're told to be okay with not having answers, because that's your job, is to find the answers, not guess the answers.
That makes total sense. Now, on the other side, you had mentioned 4 to 10 days. Now, a lot of folks are drying for longer than that, 14 plus days. Now, I heard from Dr. James Faust, one of the talks that he said the same thing. Same window, I'm pretty sure, was 4 to 10 days. And he talks about some of the dangers of drying longer than that. Can you get into that? What happens after 10 days when you're still drying?
Yeah. So there's certain danger if you're going out longer than 10 or 14 days. And the reason that is because any microbe that you had in your grow, you're taking it with you into the drying room. And the longer you have this bud sitting wet, the more potential you have for botrytis growth and proliferation all throughout the entire bud. For the most part, in traditional drying sense, when you're drying out a large bud, it's the outside of that bud that's drying first, and then the inside. And so that's why when I say put the buds in a jar and wait a day or so until it levels out, is because all of that moisture that's in the interior of the bud is then coming to the outside, and it's equalizing. And so if you're leaving the center of that bud at 0.88 water activity or even higher, every minute is a second of botrytis or fusarium or whatever you might have could really take over and cause problems.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.